Ms. King, may I have a roll call, please?
Janelle Astorga, Ronaldo Morita,
Here.
Courtney Jackson,
Here.
Josefina Dominguez.
Here. Next is the agenda adoption. May I ask for approval of the January 8th, 2024 Policy Committee meeting agenda?
I move to approve the January 8th, 2024 Policy Committee agenda.
I second it. Ms. King, may we have a roll call, please?
Janelle Astorga, not here yet. Ronaldo Morita,
Here.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes. Item number 3, action items. Our first item for discussion and action is to consider archiving non-required board policies in Section F, Facilities Development and Transferring Responsibility to Administration. And we have Jessica Martinez, Policy Analyst, presenting.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Superintendent Elder, welcome back. This evening, we are taking action to consider archiving non-required board policies in Section F, which is Facilities Development. This will be agenda item 3.1 in your agenda. As part of the board's ongoing policy review under student outcomes focused governance, 3 more policies have been identified by the committee as policies that are not required by law or regulation and have already been addressed in an administrative procedural directive and should therefore be delegated to the superintendent. Should the board vote to archive the policies being considered tonight, we will begin work with the administration to ensure that the related procedural directives are fully aligned with the archived policies. So under consideration tonight, we have FB, Facilities Planning, FB1, Coordinated Growth Strategy, and FD1, Capital Lease Obligations.
Okay, so any discussion, further discussion? If not, I'm going to ask for a motion.
I move to archive the non-required board policies in Section F, Facilities Development and Transferring Responsibility to Administration.
May I have a second, please?
I second it.
Ms. King, roll call.
Janelle Astorga,
Yes.
Ronaldo Morita,
Yes.
Courtney Jackson,
Yes.
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes. Moving on, our next item is to discuss revision of the superintendent evaluation process, and our presenter is our very own coach, Ashley Paz from Student Outcomes Focused Governance. Welcome back.
Hi. I want to apologize in advance. I'm losing my voice tonight. 32 hours of airplane travel has me a little verklempt, but we are going to move through this and have a great conversation about superintendent evaluation. So first of all, it's great to be here with the newly made up policy committee, and especially with our new trustees, Tom Morito and Benavides, and board member Astorga, who will join us shortly. So I want to first clarify that tonight's conversation is about how you will evaluate your future superintendent. The conversation about that the board has had with Superintendent Elder for this year's evaluation is one that you probably should have already had, and I think that I believe that you all had that discussion around this time last year, or maybe February or March. So this is really discussing the policy for superintendent's evaluation moving forward. It's really important for you all to have this conversation as a board now before you begin the process of interviewing superintendents. It's much easier to have a policy in place that you can then go into negotiations with, saying, this is how we evaluate our superintendent, rather than with a more typical path where you don't have anything going, or you have a kind of the status quo policy, you go into the negotiation, and then in the negotiation, you figure out how you're going to actually do it. That usually isn't a process that is set up for, that really sets anyone up for success and can lead to a lot of heartburn down the road. So we want to save you all as much heartburn as possible. So we provided a couple of pre-reading materials in advance of tonight's meeting. Before we get into it, I want to ask, did everyone have an opportunity to peruse those materials?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So really what this, the document titled, this coaching document titled Effective Superintendent Evaluation Process, really lays out why having a process for evaluating the superintendent is important. And also it clarifies that evaluating the superintendent and the accountability process between the board and the superintendent isn't a one-time thing. It's not a one-time event that happens each year that you build up all of this anticipation for. It's actually something that you do every month when you're progress monitoring. So each of those progress monitoring conversations that you have, they're all many evaluations of the superintendent where you are looking at district performance as it relates to your goals and your guardrails. And you are having conversations about whether or not you're on track with the expectations that the board has set for the targets of those goals and guardrails. Are we on, in those conversations, you want to know, are we on track? If we're not on track, do we know what is driving the current results that we're seeing? And two, does the superintendent have a plan for us to get on track? Those are really the three key conversations in the progress monitoring session. And after the monitoring session is over, the board will vote to accept, to table, or to reject the monitoring report. These are not, this vote is not the board approving the superintendent's strategies. It's not the board approving anything that the superintendent has done or hasn't done. You are simply voting to accept the report, and it is a excuse me, a confirmation on the record where you say, we've had this conversation, we're satisfied with the conversation, and we have a clear understanding of what the current reality is for students and what is driving that reality. So you have those conversations all throughout the year, and then annually you'll have a summative conversation where you talk about the results from the entire year. Excuse me. When you have this conversation annually, it really shouldn't be a surprise conversation. There should, this can be a process that really has a lot of anxiety built up around it historically for boards, but that shouldn't be the case. If the board is getting to the point where you're about to evaluate the superintendent and no one really knows how it's gonna go, that's not a process that's setting anyone up for success. The board really should understand what the superintendent's performance has been up until that point, because you have had those conversations every month. You know exactly what district performance looks like as it relates to your goals and your guardrails. So when it becomes time to evaluate the superintendent, if you are evaluating the superintendent on the goals and on achievement of the goals and honoring of the guardrails, then it really isn't a surprise. It's not a secret. Everyone is going to know how the superintendent has done. Now, the coaching from SOFG is that the board should be evaluating the superintendent on achievement of the goals, interim goals, guardrails, and interim guardrails. Of course, you are not legally required to do that. You can evaluate the superintendent on whatever criteria you decide. this isn't a conversation about what is legal and what is not legal. This is a conversation about what is effective. And we know that the most effective boards evaluate the superintendent the same way they evaluate the district. They consider superintendent's performance is indistinguishable from district performance. That means that if the goals are being achieved and the guardrails are being honored, then the superintendent is doing their job. And if they're not, then there is a need for improvement. The board really has to make the decision of how to move forward and what criteria you want to use as you evaluate the superintendent. I want to be clear though, any criteria that you include in the superintendent's evaluation that is not specifically achievement of the goals, interim goals, guardrails, and interim guardrails is going to be an invitation for the superintendent to redirect their attention from achieving those priorities. So that is my high-level overview of the evaluation process. Y'all don't want to just listen to me all night. I want to hear from you. What questions do you have about the process, and how would you like to make this process work for APS?
I think we should begin or address that question to veteran members. And I'll start with, well, I'll let you chime in.
So Ashley, this is Courtney. Hi, how are you? I have some hot tea here myself for my voice. So I guess my natural first question is like how do we start writing this? I mean, obviously we're going to need to have something written down. Like where do you guys have any templates or something that we can start from that have been effective with other school boards so that we know what has worked well?
Yes, and I shared, with Chair Dominguez, I have shared some sample policy language. It is short and sweet and to the point. And I'm going to go off of memory when I say this, but it is the sample language that I shared, something to the effect of annually the superintendent is evaluated on achievement of the student outcome goals and compliance with the guardrails, or honoring of the guardrails, or something along those lines. It's a very simple policy, one sentence. It's not required to be any more complicated than that. It's clear. It says this is how the board evaluates the superintendent. Now, remember, this is the SOFG sample policy, not your board should be identifying what works for you, but it is definitely strongly recommended. The most effective boards do evaluate the superintendent strictly on achievement of the goals and honoring of the guardrails.
Thank you. I see it. I didn't click in at the end, but yeah, this is very just black and white and very straightforward.
And
try to keep it easy for you.
And I just want to clarify for board member Astorga and Benavides, at the end of the document that we're discussing in the digital packet, there's a link, and it's that middle link, sample SOFG superintendent evaluation. Any other questions?
Well, I think the next question, at the beginning, you said that it would be really appropriate for us to have this in place prior to the selection of the next superintendent. So I see that in here, there's a process, like a phasing in, phase 1, phase 0, phase 1, phase 2. Oh, no, sorry, that's the evaluation process. So we just need to work on getting an adoption of a similar monitor or report like you guys have. This
Yeah,
evaluation, that seems pretty simple.
Yes, I think we need to hear from Board Member and President Danielle Gonzalez.
Thank you. So part of the reason for wanting to do this policy now is the guidance that we received around the contract negotiation, and in particular around pay. So should we decide to pay our next superintendent increases or bonus based on their ability to meet the goals, that ought to be included in the contract. And if that's in the contract, that should align with the policy. So that in particular, this question of pay, of incentives, of bonuses is not a conversation that we've really had yet as a board. It has been part of our training about superintendent evaluations in terms of, bonus. I think, and Ashley can speak to this better than I can, but that the bonuses should be based on performance or meeting the goals. And so I think that's the other thing too, is just would appreciate your guidance on how best to align to the contract. So if we move forward with some draft language change to the policy that we can then consider during our next policy committee meeting, that's not until March. So in the meantime, we'll have potentially hired a new superintendent at the end of January, early February. We'll be working on that contract negotiation. So there is some interim work that needs to happen between there, even before we can formally approve the policy. So that's the other question of timing that I think would be helpful, Ashley, if you could speak to just on what's your best recommendation for doing that? And then what I said about pay and incentives and the contract, is there anything else that we ought to consider? And these could be questions for our lawyers too, about the contract relative to the policy.
yeah. So that's actually what I was just about to say. Contract negotiations are really best left to the attorneys. I'm not an attorney, so I can't give legal advice, but I can talk to you about policy and best practices and how what is effective for school boards. And so the way that your policy reads should not be in conflict with the contract. And so if right now it's kind of a chicken or egg. Do we do the contract and then the policy, or policy and then the contract? It sounds like the contract will happen first, which is fine. Usually the contract will be more detailed. You can include in the contract how different elements are weighted. So are we going to evaluate the superintendent on the goals and the guardrails? Are the goals going to account for 50% and the guardrails are going to account for the other 50%? Are we going to weight the goals heavier and the guardrails lighter? Those are all conversations that you all have, and you can have those in the. I definitely recommend those conversations to be had in the as a board in executive session as part of the contract negotiation with your attorney. But those are things that is a level of detail that can be included in the contract that you don't necessarily need in policy. The policy could be more high level. And so think of the policy, or think of the contract as like an addendum to the policy, or an attachment to the policy as effectively. I feel like there was another question there, but that I don't know that I answered.
The other piece was just about the pay, incentives,
Yeah.
bonuses. That's just contract, but it is a conversation that we need to have as a board, I think is
Yeah.
the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is that a common practice? Ashley?
To
To
have
bonuses for accomplishing the goals or accomplishing the goals.
Yeah, so definitely if you have bonuses, I would encourage you to have them be tied to the goals. So if you have, achievement, like have a window within, plus or minus 0.5% or 1% on either side of your target for that year for each goal. And if they exceed that, then have a bonus, call it a stretch bonus. You can absolutely do that. You could also have it on additional criteria. So as your governance coach, it's not my recommendation that you include extra criteria, but could. It's just that every extra piece of criteria that you include is, again, incentivizing the superintendent to focus on things that are not the priorities that the board has set, and really the priorities that the community has set, because these goals and these guardrails are based on feedback you have received from the community. But yeah, it is definitely common practice for the superintendent to have some kind of bonus. But again, that's a conversation that really would happen in the contract negotiation.
So, Board Member Davia Romero, do you have any questions before I weigh in?
No, I just thought I had to leave this to the members of the committee. Like we're here to,
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
We're here to learn about
Right.
the superintendent
but not,
evaluation.
yeah.
Yeah. So I appreciate that, Crystal. But you do, I think tonight the intention was for everyone to be able to ask questions, because it is kind of the only time that you'll have to discuss it before you go into those superintendent interviews.
So in that
But-
case, well, I do have a question.
Yeah.
So with this new evaluation process, and I don't want to assume, so, that's why we ask. This is obviously something that's being developed for new superintendent. Scott, will we have any evaluation? Do we have to do that? Are we obligated to do a final one? Or everything we talk about is just for new purposes moving forward? I just didn't know if we had to have. Got it. Sorry,
Yeah, I don't know.
Side
I don't know
here.
the answer to that, but it sounds like somebody else did answer.
Yes.
So
That was my only question to that.
Which was that this whole conversation is new superintendent evaluation going forward.
yes.
Will we
That's
be-
a great question, though.
But we can discuss whether we want to do any sort of formative narrative evaluation for Scott going forward or anything like that. Because the contract likely says that we'll have a meeting in March or whatever, but we can figure out if we want to do that, if that's something that the current superintendent desires, if that's something the board wants. But the policy and the shift to student outcomes focused governance evaluation policy is forward looking only for the new superintendent.
Yes.
That's my only question.
And so, Board Member Benavides, do you want to weigh in?
I would love to weigh in, but really the only thing I have to say right now is I don't really have any questions, and it's probably because it's new information. And if they do come up, I hope that there's an open line of communication where I can ask them.
Absolutely.
But it seems pretty clear right now, which I think is a good thing.
Good. Thank you for that. And yes, absolutely. And I will be reaching out to all of our new board members tomorrow to set up some one-on-one time and to begin opening those lines of communication.
Thank you.
Board Member Tom Morito?
I agree with Heather. It is pretty, laid out pretty, and it's understandable. And I would appreciate, yes, having those one-on-one conversations. And I'm just anxious to look forward to what needs to happen, but I know that we need to get rolling. Thank you.
Board
Yeah.
members, I know I don't normally talk in committees, but I'm curious if you would like a perspective on the bonus situation that I think from the superintendent might give you some thoughts, but if you don't want it.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, you can do, and you'll do with this whatever you want. I understand that, but the concept of the merit pay and the bonuses for superintendents is actually fairly tricky because it puts a superintendent in a weird position. For example, if that had happened with me, I guide a lot of the work. I make sure things happen, but there's a lot of people under me that actually do the work. So as the numbers continue to change, it's nice that as a superintendent, you get some of the credit for that. But when you as a superintendent receive the money, it's a little awkward because there's other people who did it and they're not getting the bonus merit pay. So a lot of superintendents they end up doing is just donating it to their foundations. Because it's just it creates a tension inside the district. Now, there's also some superintendents I'm sure who take it and enjoy their new fishing boat. But I'm just saying it's an interesting position for the superintendent to be in terms of merit pay. And it's so it doesn't really fit the normal educational paradigm of pay, but you guys will do with that as you wish. I just wanted to share that perspective. It's been discussed in amongst other superintendents for a while now.
And thank you for that. And frankly, that was one of my questions, and more of a concern. I think our workforce, just because they are so poorly paid, no other word for it, phrase for it. People pay attention to that, and we're already bumping up the salary by potentially 100,000. Is that right? And so just, I think it's important to take into account. Yes, teachers got educators. Well, no, classroom teachers got an increase, and educational assistants received an increase, but they're still making, what, 25 an hour? Is that right?
They're making $25,000 a year.
A year, 25,000 a year. And so it's about perception, and perception matters. So I'll just say that I'm having a really uncomfortable moment talking about merit pay. The other thing I wanted to point out was a topic that came up during a conversation with Ms. King, and that has to do with other models of a superintendent evaluation that may not be entirely 50-50 goals and guardrails, but can carve out, I don't know, 10%, 10 or 20, I don't know, for other work operations or anyway, just something we might consider. And Ashley, could you help us in that regard?
Yeah, so I mean, my coaching is going to be consistent on that every additional piece of criteria that you include in the superintendent's evaluation is going to be inviting the superintendent to focus on things that are not achieving the goals and the constraints. Superintendent is going to have a lot of really important work to do outside of the goals and the constraints. That's not in question. But what is in question is what are the things that the board is prioritizing? If you are including other things in the evaluation, then you will be prioritizing things that are not your literal priorities that have been brought forward by the community. So again, the board can do it how the board decides to do it. But my coaching is going to be consistent across the board that the most effective boards evaluate the superintendent on the goals and on the guardrails. They consider the superintendent's performance as indistinguishable from system performance.
Okay, thank you for that. And I am told that Board Member Astorga, and I apologize, I can't see you, Board Member, but I'm told that you have your hand up, and so we're eager to hear from you.
Thank you. Yes, I just had a quick question. I know for the new superintendent in the interview questions, we did see a question in there that talks about what they would like to see in their evaluation and, that process. So I just had a question for Ashley. What would be some good advice to lead that conversation when it comes to the next superintendent? And thank you also, Superintendent Elder, for your input on that, because that was kind of the same thoughts that I was thinking. So thank you.
So would you mind clarifying your question? So, because I'm not sure I understand. So,
Yeah, just so we have an interview question
I'm
for the
sorry,
new
would you-
superintendent.
Maybe it might be better for offline because it is one of the questions that we're going to be asking a superintendent candidate. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm not sure that we should put that out publicly.
probably not.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yep. But I will answer that in general. So in general, the board has to decide how the board is going to evaluate the superintendent. And that's why this conversation is critical to have before you even begin the evaluation process or the interview process. Because if you all have an agreement on how you're going to evaluate the superintendent before you start interviewing, then you can be really clear with the people who you're interviewing. And when you say, this is how accountability works in this district, and know that they need to be clear that the priorities that your community has set, that you have set on behalf of your community, are non-negotiable. That these are non-negotiables. These are the thing that you're going to do, and that the achievement of these items is the expectation.
So Ashley, if I could just jump in here. So it sounds like what is critical for us to be working on right now is a discussion on the superintendent evaluation document as presented through our online resources, and then correspond that to the policy. We have a policy right now. Obviously, that policy is extremely out of date because it is not SOFG aligned at all. So what we also need to work on possibly tonight is discuss this evaluation tool as presented in front of us, and then maybe present some policy updated language to the policy that we already have, so long as we agree as a committee what that evaluation tool is going to look like. And then some of this other stuff we really need to leave for executive session and when the whole board is present to have some of these other contract specific discussions. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes. And so, on that note, I want to create a little bit of space for the board to be able to have this conversation without the coach looking over your shoulder. So if there are no other questions about the process, I'd like to just go off camera and allow you to have a conversation about it, and then I can come back for the next part.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So are you suggesting that we have a conversation now about the language for the superintendent evaluation? And it's language that we found on, where is it?
So you don't have to come up with your specific language right now, but I think that it is worthwhile for you all to have a conversation about how the evaluation is going to take place, how you would each individually like to see the evaluation take place. What do you feel is going to work best for this board?
Okay. Yes, agreed. Thank you.
Okay. And I will be here if you need to call me back online.
Great.
All right. Y'all enjoy.
Well, What do you think? Any,
I'll go ahead and jump in if you don't mind. Like, I love I guess the recommendations we received from Ashley because it allows us and reminds us to stay focused. Because I think we could easily get derailed, and overall our goal is to support the next superintendent as best as possible. We never want it to feel like there's a surprise or we're making their job unachievable to be successful. And I think if we stick to what the community requested with the goals and guardrails, and it's very clear, they know what the expectation is going to be, because you don't want there to be surprises. You don't want them to feel like they're focusing on too many items. And it keeps us focused. Because again, I think what we're trying to get away from, and I believe we've been pretty successful, is getting in the weeds of items that don't concern us outside of goals and guardrails, and really allow them to be effective in their job and to lead and be the superintendent they're called to be. So having that reminder and saying, let's keep the evaluation, let's keep it narrow, not get too broad. Because again, we want them to be successful. We want them to hit these goals and it to be achievable. For me personally, I'm not against a merit-based type of bonus. I know that is a standard practice with any large top executives that run any type of large business. And ultimately, we are a big employer, because it does give some type of incentive to them to be successful. And when we're tying it to these goals and guardrails, it allows them to hit different milestones throughout their time with us. Whatever we choose as a board, I'm obviously will support it completely. But I want to challenge us too to also think outside of the box of what we've always done. And to really think that the type of person that we are targeting, we don't want the same type of, I guess, status quo of the way it was, and really allow them to really thrive in their right, unless that's something we choose not to. But again, I think it's up for discussion, what we think may or may not be appropriate for our next superintendent.
and so I just want to clarify, when you say that you are in favor of keeping a very narrow focus on the evaluation tool, are you talking about a 50-50 split between the goals and the guardrails?
I can't necessarily say without, like, it has to be 50-50. It could be 60-40, but I don't want to add additional items that are outside of goals and guardrails. I guess that's what I'm saying. But I'm open to percentages as we discuss, and if we figure that there's more weight on certain items than others, which I believe there are, because I think some do have greater substance than others, we can discuss that as a whole.
Okay. So I hear some kind of split between goals and guardrails, maybe weighting some of the goals, some of the guardrails, and you're in favor of a bonus. Board Member Tom Juanito.
I think because we've just initiated the goals and the guardrails, that we, one, narrow it, like you said, Crystal, and that we just stay on task so that, one, we're more effective, and that also, especially when we're evaluating, I know right now as we're looking at some of the videos and all of that, I was trying to think, how are we evaluating these? What are we looking for? And it would be helpful as a new board member that those were in place, especially when you're talking about evaluation and processes, and then attaching it to the goals and the guardrails. It would be very helpful. I agree there.
Okay. And what about the concept of a bonus? Where do you land on that?
Let me think about it.
Okay. And the concept of weighting some of the goals.
I think we should, because it does tear down to specifically these goals and guardrails, and it's one more focus, and it's one to also say that we are going to be specific, because if this is our place as a board and this is where we want to take it forward, I think we have to really address those and the percentages would be adequate.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Board Member Benavides.
Thank you, Board Member Dominguez. And I don't know how to properly weigh or add weight to the goals and guardrails upon, first consideration. The goals, it seems to me, would have more weight because I feel like they're goals and it's clear how to achieve them, or it's clear when they are achieved. But as I'm reviewing the guardrails right now, I see that there's, benchmarks in place. And so I really don't know if assigning, goals 60% and guardrails 40% or something even less even is appropriate. So I'm sorry, I'm just thinking out loud and throwing that out there for consideration and discussion. Where the bonus is concerned, I really appreciate Superintendent Elder's feedback because I understand what he's saying. Any leader of any organization understands that the people who are really doing the work are the people that are under us. And I know for myself, it would be very difficult if my board were to come to me and say, we feel like you achieved these goals and made this much progress, and we want to reward you for that with a monetary gift. And it would be hard to accept because honestly, it's the people I work with, it's my colleagues who are doing the majority of the work and helping us achieve these goals. And so I don't know if it's appropriate. I think that historically, if it's happened, it's a wonderful thing. I think it's great that some superintendents decide to donate it to foundations because they do see the big picture and that it's all of us, not just one of us. But I think that we really need to take into consideration that because this is something that happens and it's not unusual, maybe we should think about doing it. To be honest with you, I'm not really in favor of it. I'm just going to put that out there right now, but I'll go with the consensus of the board on that. And I think that's really all I have to contribute at this time. And I promise at some point I will stop saying, I'm new, so I want to feel it out and see, what everybody else says and how they feel. But that is my input right now. And I hope it wasn't too confusing. And if you need any clarification, Board Member Dominguez, please let me know.
Thank you. No, you're fine. I think we've been down that walk.
Thank you.
And I am being coached that the bonus conversation has come to an end because it is reserved for contract negotiations. But perhaps you can weigh in by way of email. Is that appropriate? Probably. During executive session, yeah. And so I'm gonna take care of people online because I'm afraid I'll forget. So Board Member Astorga, do you want to weigh in on this conversation, please? Minus the bonus.
Yes, I agree with Board Member Benavides. I think that the guardrails are just as important as the goals. And if anything, they're kind of like the building blocks in order to make the goals, right? So we should be looking like at guardrail number 1, wraparound support systems that would probably help us get better post-secondary readiness or things like that. So I don't see how, I do see how one can outweigh more than the other, but I do think that they should all be held to the same standard when it comes to making sure that what we put in place is happening for our students. So I'm interested in having more of that discussion and what the weighing options look like. But right now I'm kind of seeing it all as being held to the same standard because in order to have one thing, we need to have the other, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Board Member Jackson.
I don't think I have really much to add. I would agree that we need to keep it very focused on the goals and the guardrails. And just as as some background, the previous evaluations included things like gets along really well with people in the community and just kind of really stuff that is really hard to actually evaluate. I know our current superintendent gets along really well with people in the community. But that's not really something that is very specific and is a way to really accurately be judged of how that is translating to improvement for our students. So I would prefer to keep it to the goals and guardrails. That, you know, the weight is I think something that can be discussed 50-50 or 60-40. And then I think the only other thing is I wouldn't add anything else to this. The next part that we'll probably move to next is how we're going to translate that into the policy language. But I wouldn't go any further right now outside of the goals and the guardrails. Because it's fair. That's what's fair to the incoming superintendent, right? To know exactly what they're being evaluated against.
Thank you. And Board Member President Gonzalez.
Thank you. So I think I agree nearly entirely with Member Jackson and Tapia Romero around, and I think Tom Morita as well, in terms of making sure that the evaluation itself is really grounded in the goals and guardrails. And when I say really, I mean entirely. So I wouldn't add anything else. That they're evaluated on the goals and the guardrails. Like those other members, I'm flexible, whether it's 50-50 or 60-40. And I think that again could be part of what comes into contract negotiation conversations as well, in terms of how the new superintendent wants to be evaluated. I think in terms of the policy itself, which was nice tee up, that's what I was going to say. I'm reading the current procedural directive that was in our packets and reading the guidance that we received from the Council of Great City Schools. And it does seem to me, excuse me, like our policy could read with what's sort of at the end of page 3 of their guidance, the annual superintendent evaluation. So if our policy read the board's annual, the board will evaluate the superintendent annually and then talk about the process here in terms of the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, having formative and summative, having 360 self-eval and board eval, including the data from the monitoring reports, all of those things being included and listed in there, as well as the timing. I know the timing is included in the contract as well. I think this is just a great starting point to almost sort of pull what's the end of page 3 into page 4 into the first draft of the policy itself. There are some things in the current procedural directive, like a couple of words that I think are helpful to keep, like the mutually agreed upon feels important. But I think this stuff around that we're going to use a set form for every year, that's important, keeping that language. And so I think in terms of process, if there was a draft policy that the policy analysts were to work on that sort of pulled some of this language from the SOFG guidance and kept some of the stuff around just standard form, mutually agreed upon language and timing from the current procedural directive, I think that would be a great starting point.
Okay. And I may have to come back to you about that. Is that the same, is that the form that you sent me earlier? The document that,
It's in our packet.
it is in our
The
packet.
first link,
Okay, yeah.
under 4.1, the second link, superintendent's evaluation.
Under effective superintendent.
Yeah.
And then it's procedural directive, superintendent evaluation.
This is what we have currently.
Yeah, click the next one there and then go all the way to the end. It's on page
360?
Yeah, where it says, what is the superintendent evaluation process? Yeah, I think you're
Yeah.
So that from SOFG, but from our current procedural directive,
Correct.
the superintendent shall be evaluated each contract year in accordance with the process outlined below. And then we paste from SOFG in there.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. And I don't think we disagree. We're all in agreement about, I'd like to see a 50-50. And then further discussion on, within that, if we believe, it's food for thought for me, to go back, revisit the goals and the guardrails and see if any one of those, would be weighted in any shape or form. So, but they all look pretty important, so, I'm inclined to stay with a pretty simple and direct, narrow is the word that, Board Member Tapia Romero used. I think it's appropriate. Okay, do we need any further comments, last observations?
I think just clarity on next steps and deadlines.
And so I get the sense that this needs to happen pretty soon, like ASAP. And so just the format for doing that, does it require an executive session, meeting, of all of us? Ashley, are you there? Or,
Yeah, so it's my understanding that your next policy committee meeting is in March. And you will have a superintendent hired by then. So I think that you just stay with the calendar that you've expected. But now that you've had this conversation, I think you have a pathway that you know what to expect. Certainly the board could decide to have to expedite the process and move it out, but I don't know that that's necessary.
I think that's correct. I think that is correct. In terms of the nuts and bolts of the actual process and the deadlines, what I was suggesting was we already have an executive session on January 10th and January 31st. The first one agenda has already been posted, is already set. What we need to have done before January 31st and we begin the contract negotiation is overall agreement on how we're going to evaluate the person, overall agreement on how we're going to pay the person, overall agreement on what the pay is going to be. And that will be in the executive session on January 31st. So the things that we need going into that is the draft policy, which is, I think, pretty straightforward. But I guess when I was saying deadlines, like from Ms. Martinez's perspective, what's realistic for having a draft presented to the policy committee chair to review and have some back and forth with you, and then to have in written format back to the board prior, again, to the 30th, 31st is when we need to have grist for the mill.
yep, please.
Our first read, essentially, right?
Are we even going to have time for a first?
Okay.
and Second, and
So we've got the legislative session starting as of next week. I think my question will be is how soon can the board work? I think I can have a draft to you by the end of next week, depending, you know what I mean, before the session really gets rolling, that, can certainly put in the work to get it done.
So I think the two things are there's the draft of the policy, which I think we're in agreement on for the
Yep.
most part. And so I think that's just, you have that to us before, I don't know, whatever the posting dates are for when we're talking about stuff prior to January 31st. We will talk about the evaluation that should be listed on the posting date for that exec session or whatever. But the conversation around the details, we won't work out until we're in exec on the 31st.
So how
And
about
so
if
then
we
you
have-
can't, yeah, go ahead. Well, so then you can't do.
What if I have a draft to you by the end of this week then? Just working around some of the parameters that you've identified for now, and then we can work from that draft?
that would be perfect.
That'd be great.
The sooner the better is how I'm feeling. And I'm trying to honor your preparation for the legislative session at the same
Oh,
time.
no, it's fine. This is a good timeline for me. This
Okay.
is- Yeah.
And I think it's fairly straightforward.
I think so.
Okay. Okay,
Can I ask one
anything-
process question?
go ahead.
So in terms of also expediting and respecting the committee and the committee chair, if the policy analyst writes the draft and shares it with the committee, I think the committee can make revisions to the doc without breaking quorum. I'm trying to make sure that we can
Yes.
continue to move some stuff forward
And I think we funnel that
through the
through
committee.
the committee, but also through, I'll work with Johanna on that. We've done this before, I believe.
Well, yes, we have, but it was different because we had the 7-member committee. So now I guess maybe it's the same because it's a 4-member committee. So it is just keeping it on the doc and keeping things public and keeping things posted. But the committee members, I think it would be you 3 who do the iterations, but you 4, sorry. 4 would do the iterations back and forth with Jessica prior to next drafty draft.
That would be great.
Okay,
So will you do that on a doc? A Google Doc, all 4? Is that?
Well,
That-
what she's saying is that Ms. Martinez is going to send a doc to me, a doc to you. So we'll have our individuals, then we'll make our own edits on that own document so that it's
Right.
not a quorum issue. She'll take all of the,
It'll all funnel.
the
through.
edits, consolidate it, and then create
So
one
there is
policy from
no-
there.
No quorum.
Right.
And that's all I wanted.
So we're
to
not breaking.
ensure. Yeah, honoring quorum. So it sounds to me like we are lining it up so that we will have this policy in place certainly before the 31st. Is that correct? And
We'll have
possibly,
we'll have a draft policy of it. Yeah.
well, we'll have by the 31st.
Mhm. Yes.
Correct. Closed session on, so closed session on the 10th or the, okay.
Because the
the-
10th is already.
It's already, yeah, the agenda is already done. But we do also have another, do we have the 16th as a closed session?
It's a possibility if needed.
Interviews,
If needed.
the virtual interviews.
Just wondering if we can use that in any way
So
to expedite.
I think the thing that's important about the 31st and the week following is that's the contract negotiation. So let's say we find candidate who is amazing and we think we should pay them the top notch of the salary. Then maybe we're not talking bonuses, or maybe we find a candidate who is like really into the bonuses and then we are talking bonuses, or we find a candidate who's not so into so I think it's going to depend on those things and the conversation with the attorneys, the candidates' attorneys, and us. So that's all going to be in motion. So we'll have the draft to go into the 31st. We'll have our conversation in executive in the 31st. We're going to come out of that and be in contract negotiations. So back and forth with the attorneys, and that's going to influence the rewrite of the policy that we won't actually
I
approve until
I
March.
see. Okay. So those conversations influencing the,
But the point of us working on it now is so that when we go into those contract negotiations, at the very least, the candidate knows, like, at the very least, we're evaluating on these. And so that's kind of what leads up to that. And then if we need to adjust during contract negotiations, we have that ability because the policy won't be approved until March. So we're still in like draft form,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
This is
But we have a
huge win for us, I think. Sorry, I'm like, I think this is a huge win. Like, we're actually operating in a solid committee. We have action steps. We're doing what we said we were gonna do. Like, I'm celebrating like inside here because I'm like, yes, we're on the right track. We're doing everything we're needing to do.
We've been.
So this is fantastic. So anyways, just my side note.
Okay, so
That's our cheerleader.
I'm like, this is great. We're still on track.
In the committee, we're just over here.
Yeah, I'm here to hype you all. Good job, guys.
okay. So are we, are we finished with that discussion on the revision to the superintendent's evaluation process? We know we're expecting a draft by the end of the week. Yay, thank you. And that will be, that draft will be, will dictate our conversation on the 31st.
Yes.
So we're ready to move to the next topic, which is 4.2 on the agenda. Next steps for policy review and diet. And our presenter is Ashley Paz, our coach.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so the next topic for us to discuss is the work that has been done so far on policy review, and then discussing the next steps. So last summer, the board called an ad hoc committee who conducted a review of all of the board's policies. And so in this policy review, there was the process that what they went through was they identified which policies that you have on the books are required by law. So that's one question. Two, the next question is which policies are implemented by the district, by staff, and which ones are more implemented by the board. And then three, which policies are more directly related to the goals and the guardrails, and which ones are least influenceable of the goals and guardrails. So except for the is this legally required or not question, the rest of the questions are based on a scale of 1 to 10. So the committee went through, and actually I think the full board went through and rated a number of the policies, or maybe even all of the policies. President Gonzalez, you were the chair of that committee, so maybe I should give you an opportunity to share those specifics.
Well, just that the committee did the rating and then presented, and then Ms. Martinez presented them to the board for review and discussion questions.
That's right. And so all of the policies have been reviewed and rated, and the board has been in the process of archiving all of the policies that fell within. So remember, they were rated on a scale of 0 or of 1 to 10. So everything that fell that was rated 4 and below has been in the process of being archived. So one of the next steps that this committee will have to take is to make a recommendation of the board what to do with those remaining the remaining policies that have not been archived yet, that fall within that 0 to 4 or 1 to 4 level. And then so do you, I guess that's the next question, is like, what does this committee want to do with those policies? So the board has already gone through the previous committee has gone through the process of rating them. The previous board reviewed them. So now the committee just needs to make a recommendation. So I think that's the question on the first question on the floor is, how do you want to handle these? I think it's 47 policies that are rated between 1 and 4 that are outstanding.
Correct. And I'm eager to purge and get this off our plate. We're not going to have a committee meeting in February. So I requested that we start sending these 47, in chunks, to administration to review, decide if any of them are going to get bumped back to the committee or to the board.
Oh, hold up. So these policies, they are just for archival, not for administrative review. So these are, so they will go to admin, And then admin can decide whether or not they want to include those policies in their manual as procedural directives, but they're not required to do that. These policies, so this is a question of whether or not the board wants to maintain these policies on the books that the board in the board's policy manual. And so the previous board and the previous committee agreed that everything that was rated 4 or below, and the question of is this board work or superintendent work, would be archived. And those are things that are not required by law. There are things that some of the policies that are required by law go onto a legacy list, and those are maintained on that legacy list under board policy. But there's still things that are just kind of routinely updated. But the board is choosing to not spend a lot of time on those things because they're not necessarily policy that the board is responsible for implementing.
So we are happy to recommend all 47 over we're on board to archive them. But we're also in conversation with our policy analyst and administration, and I've asked her to come up so she can weigh in on this conversation.
Hi, Ashley. So when we took the last batch of policies to cabinet for review, just to make sure that they were confident that we could align those procedural directives, et cetera, it only happened with one policy. But we did have cabinet request that the board retain a policy that they felt they would really like to have the board's input on. That policy specifically was naming and renaming of facilities. I don't anticipate that it's going to happen very often, but I would love it if we can leave the door open for administration to be able to say that they'd like to have board oversight on some of that work if they choose to do so.
Yeah, so if the board chooses to, this would be a great time for the board to decide whether, for the committee to decide whether or not they want to retain that policy, or if it's one that you want to recommend for deletion. And definitely like hear the administration's desire, that they hear the staff say that, hey, board, we'd like your feedback on this. But if the board decides that that's not something that they want to be their work, then it's not board work anymore.
Of course.
But the decision is the board's, not the administration's.
Of course.
Okay, and so there's a discussion on the table then regarding, do we want to work with administration on naming buildings or renaming them? And just going to ask you to weigh in, starting at the far right with board member Tapia Romero.
I'm fine with it. Like if they're requesting our assistance with it, I obviously don't mind providing input. I could go either way though.
Sorry. So I think this is sorry, I don't mean to be like particular, but I think this is a committee decision. I totally.
No, you're totally fine.
Right.
I was
think
just
this is more
Oh.
committee that has to decide this. I mean,
Thank
I love you,
for
girl.
reminding me. I'm still in committee of the
Sorry,
whole.
I know.
It's hard to okay, so never mind.
Sorry, I don't mean to be particular.
No, you're good.
So board member Courtney Jackson.
Yeah, so I think I appreciate that they would want our input into that, but I think that is very clearly administrative work, kind of based on the fact of when this has come to us before, we weren't actually ever included in that decision. It was just brought to us to say, we are renaming this building such and such, and here's why. And it's because the administration, they're the ones that have that intimate knowledge of who has worked here, who has done the work that requires a renaming. And that isn't something that the board would really ever have any input into anyway. So as far as I'm concerned, that's administrative work. And I say that we archive all 47.
Well, it was in a previous.
Yes, it was in a previous, so the board did vote, I don't know when, one of our previous
But
meetings.
we've already archived
Oh,
it?
yeah, we've
but
already,
they-
no,
Oh.
we've already kept it, but
But it,
on the discussion, yeah, so that one's passed, it's already happened. But what I'm saying is in the future, if we have a situation like that come up again, where administration says, we really feel like we'd like for the board to I don't think it's gonna happen a million times, and I don't know if Superintendent Elder would have any thoughts on that. It did just happen with the one, but while we're talking about the naming and renaming, I actually had to review that one today for a department, because even the procedural directive, requires board review. Why that hasn't happened in the past, I don't know, but that's what we've got down in policy on procedural directive. So again, though, that ship
So that's-
sailed and we're already through that one. But if the board decides that you all wanted to say, no, forget it, we're just going to archive them and let admin sort it out, that's absolutely okay as well.
So the question, sorry, I thought the question before us was, we have 47 that are still pending. That's the question, right?
Yes.
And so the question that you are asking the committee is, do we want to archive those 47?
Do you want to archive those 47, but also do you want to leave room for there to be a review by administration to be able to say, in this particular instance on this particular policy, as happened in the past, do we want to leave room for that? Or do you guys, just want to go through and axe them and move on?
I mean, I feel pretty confident with the work that the previous team worked on, which I think was board member Peterson and board member Gonzalez. I feel confident with the work that they did, and I'm happy to abide by their recommendations for archives. So I'm happy with that.
board member Tomo Edito?
I also agree. Let's go ahead and move forward, and then also support the committee that did work on them, and that they knew what was going on.
Step forward.
Board
Board-
member Astorga?
I agree on archiving all 47. However, I do think we should have a little bit of room in case administration does want to have conversations with us. I'm just thinking about naming buildings and relating that to naming statues and possible conversations that might be brought to the board on that. So we might want some leeway when it comes to those conversations, but I'm fine with archiving them.
And I'm in agree, I occupy the same space, board member Astorga. I feel I'm eager to, I'm eager to get these off our plate. And having said that, I also want to leave some room for conversation, as long as it's not more than one or two. Just, I want to be collaborative, right? In the spirit of collaboration and a willingness to listen to another argument that the administration might present. We don't walk in their shoes, and we mostly don't want to, but so I'm feeling the way board member Astorga is, and so what we have here is a 2-2 vote. So or 2-2 weighing in on.
There's also. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, thank you. I do want to emphasize that policy was very much an outlier. It was
Okay.
very much an outlier, and really, I don't think that type of situation is going to have. We do like to make it a practice to take the policies to admin, just for their sake, to be able to say, hey, heads up, this work is now going to trickle down to you. I'll be very happy to to bid those 47 adieu at your direction as soon as you'd like to have that happen.
If I can, just one other, where there was disagreement from me or member Peterson or anything sort of in the gray area, we were like, make it a 5. And so they're 5, they stay for now, and we can bring them back later. The conversation on the naming of buildings was, yes, it's political. Yes, it's related to the vision and values of the community. Yes, it's related to our history, colonialism, slavery, all kinds of issues, but it's not related to student outcomes and goals and guardrails. And so that's done.
It's a 5 or it's gone.
That's gone. That was the conversation that we had. So I think it was a 4 or whatever, I don't know, but that one's done. Anything that was similarly on the fence though, like we pretty consistently were like, nah,
Make it a 5.
make it a 5. And there's not very much that's like that.
No.
And I will say this policy, as someone who cares about names and understands the values of names and our history, is already pretty good. Like it does say a lot about community engagement and community voice and respect for our communities. And so for that reason too, it wasn't worth bringing up. This was all, so I'll stop there.
Okay. So 47 out, archived.
I love it.
Good. Okay. Ashley, do you want to weigh in on anything?
Yeah, so the next steps for the policy diet, when the board decides to impanel a new committee to conduct the policy diet, the next step is to take the policies that are remaining and review them and have a conversation. So essentially the way that you go through it is you read each policy and decide, is this a policy that we want to keep? Is it one that we want to delete, or is it one that we want to modify? So you can go ahead and have that conversation really whenever you decide that it's a priority for your board to have the policy to conduct the policy diet. But it's not my recommendation for y'all to do that for a while. You've got a lot of other really big work going on, and you just did you just went through a really big process of offloading a whole lot of your policies. So I would definitely not want to encourage you to get into that until after probably the summer.
Okay. And I'm just checking in with previous policy chair, and does that sound about right? Okay, good.
And is there, I think that is everything. So I know that there was also a question about some finance policies that needed to be reviewed. But I want to be clear that those are policies that really need to be reviewed by your staff, because they really are policies that the staff should be looking at. And so they may bring forward a number of policies that would be acceptable to be deleted. But that recommendation should come from staff, because they're the ones who know they know those policies best, and that's their level of expertise. So I would really encourage you to defer to them for those handful of finance policies. And that should probably also go through the finance committee if it hasn't done so already.
And so we already, I reached out to our finance team on the administrative side. I'm a lot eager to get these on the March board agenda for approval to archive. And so they're working on that in the next 8 weeks. And I'll let them reach out to finance if they need to do so, or finance chair reach out to them in that review. But that's in the works, yes.
All right, sounds good. Well, it's great to see everyone tonight, and really excited about the work that's coming up with this board.
Thank you. And we will be talking soon again, right? I think you reached out to her already.
She's like, I'm out of here.
She's out of here. All right, our next item is the chair report. And as we discussed this evening, one of the first priorities of the committee is to complete the policy or to complete the policy diet that began last year. I have a question though, since I've got the former chair here. How many more policies are there to review? I don't have that
No, we
paper.
reviewed everything, right?
Policies are pending review, but yeah, everything's done.
So it's done.
Everything has been reviewed or rated.
Okay, so we are finished once all
Except we
these.
skipped fiscal because we were redoing budget, and
Right.
we were redoing the finance committee, but
So the potential for being completely finished with this in March is real.
no, the next step is now that the rating has been done, there's a score assigned of keep, modify, or delete. And then for the keeps that are the goals and essentially, well, most tied to goals and guardrails and board responsibility, using policy committee to create a monitoring, policy monitoring process. And that's part of the work that when Ashley was saying we would reconstitute the ad hoc committee to work on that. And so that would be looking at the keep, modify, delete, and then sort of determining what happens with the keeps
Okay,
and how we modify. And that's the thing that is not urgent since we're hiring a superintendent and we have new
Right.
board members and
so is that what he's referring to in terms of summer work?
I think somewhere later in the year, but yeah.
Yeah, summer later.
Like
Okay.
she mentioned, the ones that have been rated 5 and above, that then we're gonna have to go back and do a keep, modify, delete review of those.
Okay, great. Still, it's exciting to purge. Um, so there you have it. We'll continue the process of policy diet work into the summer or later this year. Staff is working on reviewing D, fiscal management policies that may no longer be needed since the board approved its budget policy at the end of last year. And so staff will be recommending that many of those policies be archived, and that work should be finished by the end of February. Staff is also reviewing policies that the ad hoc policy review diet committee determined weren't board work. Many of those, the 47, we all agreed can move on to the March board agenda to be jettisoned, well, to be archived. We also will be working to update the superintendent evaluation policy. As we stated earlier, we will get something in draft form by Friday. I wrote the date, the 8th? No? Today is the 8th.
Be the 12th.
The 12th. And so thank you. We'll move quickly through that so that that's ready. A final draft. I don't know what the 31st will have a draft enough that we can move forward with executive session discussions around the contract. Next policy committee meeting is tentatively scheduled for March 4th at 5 p.m. We are still working out the details for dates, times, and frequency of policy committee meetings, but I think we're mostly in agreement that we're shooting for every other month. And we also need to determine whether committee meetings can be held virtually. I think, well, we'll have more conversation about that, but that sounds like a refreshing idea. And if that's it, then we are adjourned.